The church bells were meant to be the loudest sound that morning, but for her, they were nothing more than background noise. Her heartbeat. That was louder. In the corridor just behind the altar, her satin heels barely touched the stone floor as she moved. She wasn't supposed to be there. She was supposed to be waiting, smiling, ready to take her first step toward the rest of her life. But someone, had pulled her here instead. The scent of roses from her bouquet clung to her fingers, though her grip was weak now. She had been holding it so tightly moments ago, as if it could keep her steady. The voices were faint at first, a laugh, low, too familiar, followed by a whisper that made her skin prickle. She froze. The hallway was empty. Sunlight spilled in from the tall stained glass windows, painting the walls in colors that should have felt holy, but somehow felt wrong. The sound came again, a muffled gasp, the scrape of a shoe against tile, and then the unmistakable click of a lock sliding into place. Her hand lifted, almost on its own, fingers hovering over the brass handle of the church bathroom door. The cool metal felt heavy beneath her touch. For a moment she thought of turning back, pretending she hadn't heard, pretending she hadn't followed that invisible thread pulling her forward. But some truths don't let you walk away. Slowly she pressed her ear to the door. Her own breath filled her ears until she heard it again, the voice of the man she was about to marry. And another voice, softer, older, one she had trusted her entire life. She felt the world shift under her feet. Her knees weakened. The bouquet slipped from her grasp, petals scattering across the floor. And when she finally turned the handle, stepping into that room, she learned that the altar wasn't the most sacred place in this church. No, it was the most dangerous. If you think this could never happen to you, you're wrong. Subscribe now, because the day you stop hearing stories like this might be the day you miss the warning signs in your own life. The door swung open just enough to let the light in, a narrow blade of gold cutting through the dim room. And in that thin strip of daylight, she saw movement. A hand pulling away too quickly, a shadow turning toward her. They froze, all three of them. No one spoke, no one breathed. She stepped back, her heel catching on the uneven stone. In that moment, she felt an entire lifetime's worth of trust crack. Not shatter, not yet, but crack, like glass under pressure. The smallest shift, and it would break completely. She turned away, forcing her feet to move, but each step down that hallway felt heavier than the last. The laughter of the guests beyond the door felt distant, muffled, like it belonged to another world. Hours earlier, she had believed she belonged to that world. She had stood before a mirror, surrounded by bridesmaids, the air thick with the scent of hairspray and perfume. Her mother had been busy greeting arriving guests, and the groom, her groom, had sent word that he was on his way to the dressing room. That was the last time she felt certain about anything. Looking back now, she remembered the small things, how the groom's eyes seemed to wander when they sat together at the rehearsal dinner, how his phone always seemed to light up with a message from her, the woman who now stood behind that door with him, the same woman who had raised her, guided her, prayed over her. She remembered the way they sometimes laughed together, a kind of private joke she was never invited into. She had brushed it off. Who wouldn't? It was easier to think it was harmless than to admit the thought that had whispered in her mind and kept her awake some nights. The bride's fingers brushed over the folds of her gown as she made her way toward the empty side corridor of the church. She needed space, air, anything to keep her from turning back and demanding answers she wasn't ready to hear. Through the high windows, the sun carved sharp patterns across the pews. The guests shifted in their seats, unaware that the day they came to witness was already collapsing. Somewhere, the choir's voices rose in gentle harmony, their song winding through the air like smoke. She kept walking, each step carrying her further from the scene she had just stumbled into, and yet the image followed her. The look on his face, startled, but not guilty enough. The look on hers, wide-eyed but not ashamed. It was then she realized something. This moment, it hadn't started here. This wasn't an accident. It was the result of 100 smaller moments, scattered over months, each one disguised as nothing worth worrying about. She had missed them all. And now, as she stood hidden in the shadows of the side aisle, the truth felt like a weight pressing against her chest. The ceremony was minutes away. The guests were waiting. And the one decision she made in the next few moments would define not just the rest of the day, but the rest of her life. If you've ever felt that gnawing suspicion before, type "I know the feeling" in the comments right now, and if you won't, explain why. What are you hiding? The clock above the choir loft ticked quietly, though no one noticed it but her. The ceremony was supposed to begin 10 minutes ago. The aisle runner lay untouched, its white fabric glowing under the colored light from the stained glass. The bouquets that lined the pews swayed gently in the faint summer draft coming through the old stone walls. She stood in the far corner of the sacristy, her back pressed to the cool wall, hidden from the view of guests. Her veil, carefully arranged earlier that morning, had shifted slightly to one side, but she didn't fix it. Somewhere outside the room, the best man was pacing, speaking into his phone in hushed tones. She caught fragments of words. "He's not ready. Just give him a minute." And then the sound of hurried footsteps moving away. Her hands found the seam of her dress, fingers tracing over the beads sewn into the fabric. Hours ago, she had admired every detail in the mirror, thinking of how they shimmered when she moved. Now, the weight of the gown felt different, heavy, almost suffocating. Guests murmured in confusion. The choir's song ended. Silence filled the church for a moment before the organist began to play something soft, a piece clearly meant to stall for time. She caught sight of her maid of honor in the doorway. Their eyes met for only a second before the other woman quickly looked away, pretending to adjust her bouquet. The movement was too quick, too rehearsed. It wasn't nerves, it was avoidance. And then there was the mother of the groom. She reappeared from the hallway, her hair smoothed, her lipstick untouched, her face a portrait of calm control. She whispered something to the officiant, who nodded, glanced toward the bride's hiding place, and then turned away. That was when the bride understood. They thought she would go through with it. They thought she would walk down that aisle, smile for the cameras, and pretend the past 10 minutes hadn't happened. But every breath she took now was filled with the echo of that locked door. Every step she imagined taking toward him was shadowed by the image she could not unsee. The air inside the church felt warmer now, heavier. Each note from the organ seemed stretched, drawn out, as though time itself refused to move forward until she made a choice. And standing there in her wedding gown, with every pair of eyes in the building waiting for her, she began to realize that the day was no longer about promises made. It was about truth, and the cost of speaking it in front of everyone who had come to witness something else entirely. If you're still watching now, you're one of the few who will hear the real truth, the part others will never know. Subscribe before this disappears from your feed. From where she stood, she could still see the hallway that led to the bathroom. It seemed quiet now. Too quiet. But silence has a way of holding on to the sound that came before it. And in her mind, she could still hear it. The faint, breathless laugh, the voice she knew better than her own, and the other voice, low, warm, and impossibly wrong. She told herself to stay where she was, to let it go, to walk out when they called her name, and pretend nothing had happened. But something in her legs refused to obey. They carried her forward, each step echoing off the stone walls, the sound somehow louder than the music still drifting faintly from the main hall. The closer she came to the hallway, the slower her pace became. She noticed the little things: a drop of water clinging to the brass handle of the door, the faint scent of cologne mixed with perfume in the air. She reached for the handle, her palm cold against the metal. The latch felt stiff, as though it hadn't been meant to open so soon. Then, there it was, a shuffle from inside, the muted sound of someone adjusting clothing, a murmur too low to make out, then a pause. She turned the handle. The door gave way reluctantly, opening just enough for light to spill inside. And there they were. He was facing her, his jacket unbuttoned, his eyes widening in a way that didn't look like guilt. It looked like calculation, like he was already trying to decide which story he would tell. She had seen that look before, in smaller arguments, in harmless lies that she'd let slide. But here, in this place, it was no longer harmless. And beside him, her, the woman who had always been steady, who had prayed over every meal, who had brushed her hair before school and whispered encouragement before exams. The same woman now stood closer to the groom than she ever had to her own daughter in a church gown. The bride's grip on the door faltered. Her voice stayed trapped in her throat, her body frozen in the kind of stillness that comes when every nerve is trying to process too much at once. He stepped forward, opening his mouth to speak, but she couldn't hear him over the rush in her ears. And then the mother spoke, quiet, deliberate, as if she had been waiting for this moment. "We need to talk, alone." Alone. The words struck like glass shattering inside her chest. She took a step back, the heel of her shoe scraping against the tile. And in that split second, before she could turn and leave, before she could demand answers, she realized something chilling. The worst part wasn't even what they were doing when she opened that door. It was what they were about to tell her. If you think you could handle finding out your future is a lie minutes before you say, "I do," subscribe now, because most people can't even handle hearing this story. One moment she was staring at them, and the next she was back in the narrow corridor beside the altar, the sound of her own footsteps echoing in her head. Her hands trembled so badly she could barely hold the fabric of her gown. Her bouquet lay abandoned near the hallway, petals scattered across the stone like pieces of something broken. She wanted to pick it up, to restore it, but it seemed pointless now. Through the arched doorway, she could see the guests waiting. Their faces were warm, expectant. Some leaned close to whisper, some glanced at the aisle runner as if willing her to appear. They didn't know, not yet, that the day they had come to celebrate had already ended in ways they couldn't imagine. She caught sight of the officiant speaking quietly with the best man's brow furrowed, his hands gesturing toward the back. The officiant glanced her way, then quickly looked elsewhere, and then she saw the mother again. Calm, collected, moving among the guests as though she were the host of a perfect event. She bent down to speak to an older woman in the front row, smiling warmly before straightening her dress. From this distance, there was no trace of the scene behind that door, no proof that anything had happened. The groom appeared moments later, standing near the entrance of the aisle. His jacket was buttoned now, his tie straightened. He ran a hand through his hair, scanning the room as if searching for her. His expression was controlled, but his eyes darted too quickly, avoiding hers whenever they caught. She turned away before he could see her watching. Her breath came shallow, her mind caught between fight and flight. A bridesmaid approached, asking if she was ready. The bride only nodded, though her lips stayed pressed together. Ready? She wasn't sure what that meant anymore. Ready to walk down the aisle toward him? Ready to stand beside him in front of everyone she knew? Or ready to tear the entire illusion apart right there in the middle of the church? The choir began again, their voices rising in a hymn that should have been beautiful, but now felt hollow. She could feel the weight of every word pressing against her chest. The music swelled, inviting her to step forward, but her feet didn't move, and as she stood there, hidden from the congregation's view, the decision began to take shape inside her, quiet at first, then sharper, clearer, until it was undeniable. She would not walk down that aisle in white, not today, not to him, not after what she had seen, but she would walk down it, on her own terms, in her own time, and when she did, every person in this church would know exactly why. If you believe she should still walk down that aisle, write forgive in the comments. If you believe she should destroy everything, write revenge. And if you can't pick, maybe you've never been betrayed. She had left the church hours earlier as a bride, but she returned, not as a victim, not as the daughter whose life had been ripped apart by her own mother's betrayal. She returned as something else entirely. The white dress, gone. The veil, torn and left on the bathroom floor like the remnants of a life that never was. In its place, a deep crimson gown that clung to her like vengeance itself. Every step she took up the aisle made the wooden floor groan, not under her weight, but under the weight of the truth she carried. People gasped, whispers scattered like fire in dry grass. Some even crossed themselves as if they feared she had returned with the wrath of God on her shoulders. But her eyes, oh, her eyes, they didn't search for the groom. They didn't search for the mother. They searched for the moment, the perfect moment, when silence would fall, and her truth would burn through this sanctuary like lightning through the night sky. And to those of you watching right now, tell me something. If you were her, walking back into the room where they all betrayed you, would you keep your silence? Or would you let the world choke on your truth? Type it in the comments. But if you just sit there watching and don't even have the courage to speak up, don't bother subscribing. This channel is for people who don't hide in the shadows when the truth demands light. Her mother was the first to see her. Her face drained of color, lips trembling as if the floor beneath her had just given way. The groom, his hands still trembling from whatever they had whispered in that bathroom, froze where he stood, eyes darting like a trapped animal looking for an escape. The priest cleared his throat, as though desperate to pull the ceremony back into the realm of the holy. But the bride didn't stop walking. Each click of her heels against the floorboards was another nail sealing the coffin of the life they thought she would accept. Then, halfway down the aisle, she stopped. Not because she was uncertain, but because she wanted them to feel it. The anticipation, the dread, the inescapable knowing that whatever she was about to say would change everything. The music in the reception hall had begun to fade into a soft background hum. Laughter from the far tables felt distant now, almost muted, as if the air itself had grown heavier. The bride stood near the center of the room in her red dress, her head tilted slightly, eyes scanning for one particular figure, the man she had once believed she could trust with her life. And there he was. The groom sat at the far end of the hall, speaking in low tones to the maid of honor. Their heads leaned too close. Her hand rested on his knee for just a second too long. To the untrained eye, it might have seemed innocent. But the bride's eyes were not untrained anymore. She had learned the language of betrayal in one day. The groom looked up. His eyes locked with hers for the briefest moment, then darted away, as if burned by the intensity of her stare. He turned back to the maid of honor, laughing at something she said, his hand sliding over hers in a gesture far too familiar for two people who were not lovers. The bride's chest rose and fell in slow, deliberate breaths. Inside her mind, memories clashed. The vows he had whispered to her that morning, and the sight of his hand now resting in another woman's palm. She began to walk toward them. Each step echoed in her ears, louder than the music, louder than the murmured conversations, louder than the pounding in her chest. Guests turned to watch, sensing something unspoken in the air, the kind of tension that makes a room hold its breath. When she reached their table, she didn't speak at first. She simply looked at them, one by one, letting the silence cut deeper than any words could. The maid of honor shifted uncomfortably, pulling her hand back. The groom cleared his throat, feigning a smile, but it faltered when he realized there was no warmth in her eyes anymore. And then she said it, her voice calm, but carrying the weight of an entire storm. "You've already taken enough from me today. You won't take the dignity I have left." The maid of honor froze. The groom blinked, his lips parting as if to protest, but no words came. The bride turned, her red dress flowing like a final curtain over a scene that should never have existed. As she walked away, a few guests stood in stunned silence. Others whispered. But all of them knew. Something irreversible had just happened. And somewhere in the back of the hall, a small group of friends exchanged knowing glances, because they had seen this story before. And they knew the bride wasn't done yet. Some guests thought she had run away for good. Others believed she had gone to cry in secret. But those who truly knew her knew she was not the type to leave without a final word. No, this was far from over. The mother reappears. She comes back in, face pale, clutching her handbag like a shield. But she doesn't go to her seat. She walks straight up to the microphone at the DJ's booth. The crowd falls silent. Confession begins. She clears her throat, her voice trembling, then steadying. There are things you all need to know, and I cannot let this wedding go on without saying them. The groom shifts uncomfortably. The father of the bride half rises from his chair. Then she says it. I have been keeping a secret from my daughter. A secret about her groom. Gasps from the audience murmurs. Someone at the back records with their phone. This man and I have a past that should never have crossed into this family, but it did, and I am sorry. At that exact moment, the back doors open again. The bride walks in, no longer in white, no longer fragile. She is in a deep crimson dress, sleek, commanding, and impossible to ignore. The murmurs swell into a roar. She doesn't even glance at the guests. Her eyes are locked on her mother. And in that moment, the reception was no longer a celebration. It was a battlefield. 2 women, 1 man, and a truth that could destroy them all. The last card. The bride takes the microphone from her mother without a word. She turns to the guests. I heard everything, and now you will hear the rest. She reaches into her clutch and pulls out a small USB stick. I found this in the groom's jacket pocket this morning. The DJ hesitates, but she nods firmly. Play it. Black screen cliffhanger for the viewer. The first distorted voices begin to play over the speakers, half-whispered, intimate, undeniable. What happens on that recording will shake you to your core, and if you think you can handle the truth, subscribe now before you miss it. Because some people watching this right now will never know how it ends. Don't be one of them. The reception hall was still glowing with gold light and laughter when Evelyn returned. The guests thought the drama was over. They were wrong. She strode into the center of the room, her red dress swaying like a flag of war. The groom froze mid-sentence. The maid of honor's face turned pale. Conversations fell silent, replaced by a hum of tension. Evelyn didn't scream. She didn't cry. She simply walked toward them, her heels clicking like a judge's gavel. Then, without warning, she pulled the phone from her purse, tapped the screen, and let the hidden video play on the giant reception projector. Gasps, whispers. A few people covered their mouths. In crystal-clear audio, everyone could hear the moans, the betrayal, the unmistakable proof. The groom stepped forward, trying to speak, but Evelyn raised a single hand to silence him. You made me a promise before God, she said, her voice steady, and broke it before the ink on our vows could even dry. You don't deserve a wife. You deserve an audience. She turned to the guests. Look closely. This is what deception wears when it dresses in wedding white. People think betrayal like this only happens in stories, but it happens every day, sometimes in silence, sometimes in public. If you believe trust should never be broken like this, subscribe now, and if you don't, write in the comments why, so the whole world can hear your excuse. The groom's parents stared at the floor. The maid of honor was trembling. A bridesmaid burst into tears. Evelyn handed the microphone to the DJ and simply walked away, leaving chaos in her wake. The reception was over, but the war had just begun. The reception hall was now a stage. The music played, the guests laughed, but every so often, whispers would sweep through the tables. Eyes flicked toward the bride, the woman in the blazing red dress. Some looked away in discomfort, others with morbid curiosity. But none could deny. She commanded the room. She didn't sit. She didn't smile. She simply watched. Every time her mother leaned in to whisper to the groom, the bride's lips curved, not in joy, but in the kind of smile that meant something was coming, something no one would be able to forget. Then came the clinking of glass. The DJ called for a toast. The bride stood. The red dress shimmered under the golden light, her heels clicking like a clock counting down to judgment. All conversation died. She took the microphone. "Some people here have been playing their own little game today," she began, her voice steady, almost gentle. "But I've decided the game ends now." Every face turned toward her. Some shifted uncomfortably. Others sat frozen. The mother's fingers tightened around her wine glass. The groom's jaw tensed. "But before I continue," the bride said, her eyes sweeping across the crowd, "tell me, where are you watching this from? Because when this video reaches your city, your town, your family, you will know exactly why it matters." She paused, her gaze hardening. "And for those of you watching right now who think this could never happen to you, remember, betrayal rarely knocks. It just walks in." The guests still didn't know what was coming, but the bride did. She was about to turn the happiest day of their lives into a memory they would pray to forget. The church was silent now. Guests shifted nervously in their seats, the air thick with confusion. The priest glanced toward the back, unsure whether to continue or call the ceremony off entirely. Then, a sound. Slow, deliberate footsteps echoed from the entrance. Every head turned. And there she was. The bride stood at the doorway, no longer in her flowing white gown. Instead, she wore a deep crimson dress, a color that screamed of defiance, pain, and vengeance all at once. The soft sunlight streaming through the stained glass windows caught on the silky fabric, making it glow like fire. The groom's smile faltered. The mother's face drained of color. The entire congregation froze. She walked down the aisle, not with the timid grace of a blushing bride, but with the unyielding stride of someone who had just buried her last ounce of trust. Each step felt like a drumbeat of judgment. No music played. No one dared to breathe. When she reached the altar, she didn't stand beside the groom. She stopped just a few feet away, letting the silence tighten its grip on everyone's throats. Then, in a voice that carried more weight than any vow could, she said, "This wedding is over, but my story isn't." She turned, her eyes locking on her mother, the woman who had taught her about love, loyalty, and family, only to betray her with the very man she was meant to marry. The tension was unbearable, and whispers rippled through the crowd like wildfire. Without another word, she walked out. The red dress swayed like a warning flag, a final statement to both of them. You will remember this day for the rest of your lives. And to you watching right now, if you think loyalty still exists, think again. If this was your mother and your groom, what would you have done? Type it in the comments. But if you've ever been betrayed and stayed silent, you need to subscribe, because the next story I'm telling might just be yours.